Okay, everybody, we'll kick off and we'll hit record, and I'll let people in if they're out and about, still haven't finishing off their dinner or whatever. Thank you everybody for joining this evening. This is a workshop for primarily aimed at angel investors, hosted by SEIS and Sapphire Capital. SEIS is a startup accelerator based here in Belfast, but working with early stage startups across Northern Ireland, UK and Ireland, helping them build their products and go to market and look for investment. And we do the introductions between startups and investors, and we find angel investors enjoy working with our startups for a number of reasons, to get involved in the industry, to be part of a community of startups, to learn more about the tech industry, but also because of the tax benefits that can come from this particular SEIS and EIS, which are shortened headlines for a scheme that Brona's going to talk about this evening. So we find it really important to help angels learn a wee bit more about the benefits of angel investing, particularly new angels, if they're thinking about getting started. And we've done a couple of workshops over the last few months, and we're continuing to do these just to help build knowledge around this asset class. So I'm going to hand over to Brona, who's going to do a presentation on SEIS and EIS and introduce Sapphire and say hello.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay. Hi everyone, thank you for coming to the Sapphire and SEIS presentation on SEIS and EIS. Doesn't want to work whenever I try. Okay, so there will be a Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions feel free to put them in the chat and I'll get to them at the end. I'll kick off there. So just a bit about myself. So I work at Sapphire Capital Partners. So Sapphire, we help early stage companies with their SEIS and EIS applications, as well as we are investment managers to several SEIS and EIS funds. So my day-to-day activity largely consists with working with startups and helping with their advanced assurance or compliance statements, as well as answering questions from companies and investors. So what is SEIS and EIS? So SEIS is Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, whereas EIS is the Enterprise Investment Scheme. So both schemes are essentially lucrative tax relief schemes introduced by the government to encourage investors to invest in high risk early stage companies. They do this by offering incentives to investors that basically helps minimize the risk slightly regarding these companies. So the Enterprise Investment Scheme is for the slightly more mature companies, only slightly really, that tend to be in the growth stage of their development, whereas SEIS companies are for that very early stage company that tend to be still developing themselves. Under EIS, a company can raise up to 5 million a year until they reach that 12 million lifetime limit. And under SEIS, a company can raise up to 150,000 in the company's lifetime. So both schemes have been really successful since their inception. EIS has helped approximately 31,000 companies receive investment with £22 billion raised, whereas SEIS in comparison, which is less than 10 years old, has helped over 12,000 companies receive investment with over £1 billion raised. So SEIS and EIS are both very similar schemes, with main difference being around the stage of the development of the company. So a company that is newly incorporated or very early stage can qualify for both, whereas a slightly more mature company may not qualify for EIS. SEIS, as I stated earlier, is for that very early stage companies, and therefore the conditions reflect that. So an SEIS company would have less than 25 employees, be trading less than 2 years, have gross assets of less than 200,000, and have never actually raised under VCT or EIS. And the company is limited to 150,000 under this scheme. EIS, on the other hand, is for that slightly more mature. So the conditions are slightly more mature to reflect that. So under EIS, a company would have less than 250 employees, be trading less than 7 years, have gross assets of less than 15 million, as well as can raise up to 5 million a year until the company reaches that maximum lifetime limit of 12 million. Now, another criteria in addition to the SEIS and EIS is a knowledge intensive company. Now, these companies are companies that meet the EIS criteria, but additionally meet these knowledge intensive criteria. So as the name states, they are very much focused on knowledge. So these companies tend to be either very much R&D focused with a high spend in that area, or have a high caliber of employees who are master's or PhD level. Now, here are some of the main qualifying conditions a company must meet in order to qualify. Firstly, a company must be conducting a qualifying trade. So essentially, most trades under the schemes tend to qualify. However, there are a select few that do not qualify. For example, conducting a trade relating to investment or fundraising activities, or banking, that sort of thing. I would recommend anyone concerned whether or not a company's conducting an excluded trade, just have a look on the HMRC website. As I stated earlier, a company must meet the gross assets test. So for an SEIS company, that's less than 200,000. For EIS, that's less than 15 million. A company must also maximum lifetime limits. SEIS is 150,000, at which point, once that's raised, a company can then go on to raise under EIS. And the EIS lifetime limit is 12 million. A company must also have meet the UK requirement. So essentially, a company must have an element of its business in the UK, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a UK company. I'll get to that more on the next slide. So for a company that is SEIS qualifying, it would have less than 25 employees, whereas an EIS company is less than 250. The company would be less than 2 years old or trading less than 2 years for an SEIS company, and trading or is less than 7 years old for EIS. A company must also be in good financial health. By that I mean they should be able to pay their debts, not be facing any liquidity issues. Next, a company limited on the raise. So again, 150,000 under SEIS, and under EIS they are capped at 5 million per year, unless it's a knowledge intensive company, which is 10 million a year. One of the more important qualifying conditions is the risk to capital condition. So for a company to qualify, it must be able to demonstrate that it intends to grow and develop in the short term and long term, and the company must be risky. This is very much about the ethos behind the scheme. And lastly, the company must be unquoted, so it can't be on a recognised stock exchange such as the London Stock Exchange. However, a company can be on the alternative investment market. Okay, so a question I often get from both investors and non-UK companies is whether or not they can qualify for the schemes, for both schemes. So the answer is yes, as long as an element of the company is in the UK. So this takes the form of a permanent establishment condition or a UK representative. So a UK establishment is where a significant portion of the business activities is conducted in the UK. So this can be anything from management to sales activities, just as long as it's something important to the business. This condition can also be met by having a UK agent. So this is someone who's based in the UK who has the authority to enter into contracts or act on behalf of the company. So essentially, the answer is yes. So any companies that aren't in the UK can qualify as long as they meet all the qualifying conditions along with the permanent establishment condition. Now, whenever it comes to companies fundraising, there tends to be roughly 4 stages. The first being advanced assurance. Now, advance assurance isn't necessary for companies to have. However, as an investor, they tend to request it, as it kind of provides a level of comfort knowing that if you were to make an investment, that the tax reliefs would be received if the company has the advance assurance. From a company side, advance assurance is essentially a pre-approval process where you provide HMRC with a business plan, financials, just general documents to the company, about the company, showing HMRC how the company meets the qualifying criteria. With that, HMRC then gives a decision on whether or not it meets the schemes. Assuming HMRC grants the advance assurance, companies can then go out and start fundraising and receive investment. So once that has then occurred, a compliance statement can be completed. So this is the SEIS 1 or EIS 1 document. So this can be completed when the company has either been trading for 4 months or 70% of the money raised under the scheme has been spent. So as long as a company went for advance assurance, a compliance statement is pretty much a quick process, as they're more or less detailing to HMRC that just regarding the investment rounds, such as, you know, who invested, how much they invested, and whether or not there's been any changes in the company since it's advance assurance. However, if the company hasn't went for advance assurance, then you'll also be telling HMRC how you meet the qualifying criteria. So you'll be providing the documents that you would have provided in the advance assurance. So once you've submitted your compliance statement and HMRC has come back granting the company the authority to issue a share certificates, that is the SEIS 2/EIS 3 portion. And so this is just basically the information a company needs in order to complete the investment certificates for investors. So it'll just have the information such as unique investment number or the termination date, that sort of thing. So once that's received, companies then use that information to complete the investment certificates. This is the SEIS 3 and EIS 3 documents, at which point investors can go and claim their tax reliefs. So here are some of the additional requirements a company must meet in order to, or a company and investors must meet in order to qualify for the scheme. So investors must be UK taxpayers. Essentially, if anyone outside of the UK wants to be available of the scheme, it would only be applicable if they were a taxpayer of the UK. Investors cannot own more than 30% of the company. Now this is kind of important because if an investor were to, if their equity of that company was to go over that 30%, HMRC more than likely will claw back any tax relief received at that point. SEIS and EIS shares must be held for 3 years from the date they were issued. If investors dispose of these shares before that 3-year period, HMRC again will likely try to claw back any tax relief the company, the investor has received at that point. An investor cannot qualify for the scheme if they've previously invested in the company. Investors are also capped at how much they are allowed to invest under each scheme. So for an SEIS scheme, investor can't invest more than 100,000, whereas for EIS they're capped at 1 million, and for knowledge intensive companies they're capped at 2 million. All shares under SEIS and EIS must be newly issued shares, and they must be paid in full before they are issued. The shares must be full risk ordinary shares with no preferences. The money that is raised under the scheme must be spent by the company within 2 years, which tends not to be a problem for most companies. Investors must also have no conflict of interest, so they essentially can't be connected to the business that is for the SEIS and EIS company. So a connected party tends to be an employee or a director or a family member of an employee or a director. However, there is an exception where it comes to directors in the form of business angels. So essentially, HMRC allows paid directors to take advantage of the scheme as long as they are appointed after the investment has been made. So essentially, this is a bit of a win-win process win-win scenario for investors, as they don't have to choose between advising a company as a director and also receiving the tax reliefs. And probably one of the most important slides is the investor tax relief. So as you can see, both schemes have very similar tax reliefs, with EIS probably taking more beneficial ones in the form of the income tax relief. So for EIS, investor can receive up to 30% income tax relief on the amount invested, whereas for SEIS it's 50% income tax relief on the amount invested. So any income tax relief can be applied to the current tax year, and any remainder can be carried back to the previous tax year. And this can essentially bring an investor's income tax down to zero. Another tax relief under the scheme, under both schemes, is the capital gains disposal relief. So essentially this means that once the shares have been held for 3 years, and when you go to dispose them, ideally at a gain, there is no tax, capital gains tax relief, no capital gains tax on those shares. Next is capital gains tax mitigation for EIS. So this is also referred to as reinvestment relief or deferral relief. So if an investor invests a capital gain into an EIS investment, they can defer their gain until the EIS investment is disposed of. So when you basically sell your shares or dispose of them as a loss, if that happens. For SEIS, this capital gains tax mitigation, essentially you can get a exemption of 50% of an existing capital gains tax bill with this scheme. Both schemes offer loss relief. So essentially this is available for both shares that are disposed of at a loss. So given the high risk nature of SEIS and EIS, this is very important, as essentially the loss can be offset against an investor's capital gains or their income. Lastly is inheritance tax. So as long as the SEIS shares or EIS shares have been held for 2 years before the death occurs, these are potentially eligible for inheritance tax relief. Okay, so claiming tax relief. So once a investor receives their investment certificate, so that is the SEIS 3 or EIS 3 document, an investor can go on to make to claim their tax relief. So firstly would be their income tax relief. So once they receive that investment certificate, an investor can claim the income tax relief on their tax return. The capital gains deferral, this again, once that investment certificate is received, an investor can defer any capital gains tax they've accrued in the past 3 years. Regarding the capital gains relief relating to the disposal of shares, so as long as the shares are held for 3 years and you've claimed your income tax relief, any gains arising from the disposal of those shares are capital gains tax free. Lastly, for loss relief, this can essentially be claimed once the shares are disposed of at a loss. This is done on their self-assessment. And then lastly, SEIS and EIS exits. So the investment horizon for SEIS and EIS will vary, but as long as the shares are held for 3 years, you can get your tax reliefs and then exit no problem. So there are 5 scenarios in which most SEIS and EIS companies exit through. The first being a trade sale of the shares or assets. This tends to occur whenever there is a strategic acquisition by a competitor. Next is a management buyout. This is allowable, but as long as it's not pre-arranged, this is fine. Next is through a listing. A company can sell their shares on a recognized stock exchange following an IPO. Next is the sale of shares to other shareholders or through a buyback by the investee company. Again, this is allowable as long as there's no pre-arranged agreement in place with the company. and the investors. And then lastly is through liquidation. So if for some reason the company were to fail and there would be no gains had, at this point, investor would then go on to claim their loss relief. And that is me. I think I might have sped through some points, so I'm expecting plenty of questions. Does anybody have anything?
Thank you, Bruno. It was really good to kind of see the steps, you know, through from both sides of the table in terms of angel investments and from startups. And even we were talking about it just before we hit the record button, the steps from advanced assurance to getting the money into a company to actually getting your certificate and then applying it to your tax return can take a period of time. And it's kind of remembering to go through those steps and to push between the company and the investor to move that along. Is there any kind of advice of how to try and, particularly for angel investors who are busy and startup founders who are busy, how do you try and push that process along those 4 steps?
Well, with any kind of investment, I do kind of think, you know, you're best getting that advanced assurance sorted as soon as possible. Like it essentially, once that's had, you know, it kind of makes the process a bit more streamlined. So once that's received, and then essentially it's just the actual making of the investment. And then if the company itself hasn't been trading or isn't expected to trade, then it is kind of worth like anytime soon, it is worth noting that, you know, there's no going to be a company isn't going to be able to make a compliance statement until trading begins for at least 4 months, or they've spent 70% of the money. So it is worth, you know, kind of asking a company that kind of question to kind of gauge a timeline, because as you said, you know, some companies, they can immediately get their compliance statement because they are currently trading or they're not expecting to trade anytime soon. So it is just one of those, ask the question whenever you go to do it.
And then there's a question there from asking about updates. I mean, obviously through the challenging times of COVID, we were saying this earlier, that we probably think taxes will go up to make up for all the government payouts. So has there been any table changes or anything updates on the SEIS or EIS that are happening or you can see coming down the road at all?
At the moment, we haven't really heard anything different. In the last, in the budget, whenever it came out, we were looking to see if anything occurred, but there was no mention of any kind of changes. And even then, it is one of those things. Both schemes are very much, you know, praised by all the parties in charge of the government. So it is very much, it would be very unlikely if they were suddenly to go stop these schemes, because they are really beneficial when you think about it. Like 99% of all UK companies are either, you know, small or medium stage. So it is just one of these excellent schemes that kind of kickstarts the economy at least.
I think as we move out of the, you know, lockdown and into businesses looking for investment and leading into opportunities, you know, there's lots of talk of dry powder and cash being available because it's been held on to over the last year, and this could be a way of, you know, getting started for angel investors and trying to build a portfolio and also get the benefits from a tax perspective as well. Is there any other questions there from the group at all? Happy for you to come off mute or raise your hand or drop them in the chat. We've got said both Jonathan and Brona here from Sapphire, happy to take any questions. Is there any companies even that you're working on at the moment as an example that you could talk to us about? Or even are you seeing any specific industries? I know from our side, we're seeing kind of specific industries taking off: fintech, recruitment tech, climate, health and safety, legal tech, all the kind of, dare I say, more traditional industries being taken by technology and therefore looking for investment. Climate's obviously a big one.
Yeah, like last year I did notice, you know, a lot more companies starting up that was very much tech focused, or taking something that is currently available but moving it on to online. So there is been or has definitely been a noticeable growth in any companies that are IT based or technology based. And even then, predominantly in the past, these are the companies that have availed of the SEIS and EIS schemes. So it is just one of those notable, it is definitely going to continue rising in those kind of sectors, just because we all seem to be doing everything online these days. But yeah, like I imagine, as well as last year, a lot of investors were heading more into the ESG kind of sector. There just seemed to be a bit more growth in that area. So I would expect to see over the coming while, you know, companies that are very much, you know, environmentally, socially aware, that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, yeah. We have, oh, yep, sorry, Michael, raise your hand.
Yeah, hi, Bruna, how are you? Could I just ask a quick question? A lot of early stage companies, particularly here in Northern Ireland and elsewhere, their early round includes friends and family, an angel or your man up the road, but also then some government funds often get involved at that early stage. Mm-hmm. Can EIS sit comfortably alongside the likes of Tech Start or Clarendon Co-Fund and things like that?
So those are like a state aid kind of sides, I think.
Yeah, they take equity alongside the angel, so they'll match the equity. JP, you might be able to jump in on this actually, but Bruna, you
Okay, well, from a kind of company aspect, as long as the company that is taking a equity stake in the business, as long as it's not, you know, going to end up with a significant stake in the company, it should be fine. Regarding whether or not its investment is actually a EU state aid, so whether it's de minimis state aid, that would be the only one that would be cause a difference under SEIS, just because de minimis state aid would be taken away from the raise under SEIS, because SEIS is also classified as de minimis state aid. So essentially, if I've probably stated a couple of times, SEIS, you're capped at 150,000 of what you can raise. So if you were to receive 50,000 of de minimis state aid from one of these companies, that would reduce the amount you can raise. So you would have 100,000 at which you are capped under the SEIS, but it would have no effect on the actual EIS. So essentially you can still raise that SEIS and then go on to raise additional amounts under EIS.
Okay, and does everyone have to have the same terms, the angels and the government fund taking the equity stake? Do all the terms have to be the same, or can the government terms be different from the angels terms?
What kind of terms would you be thinking that would be different?
Just things like tag-along rights or preemption rights, or just sort of the small print in the term sheet.
Like ultimately, HMRC really only cares about those who are investing under their scheme. So with the other companies that are, or like companies that are providing like state aid or something, or companies themselves, they don't qualify for SEIS and EIS. So technically, HMRC doesn't really care really all as much of what their terms are. So it really is just about, as long as the SEIS and EIS investors are, you know, getting full risk shares, and, you know, basically their rights are just the same as pretty much everybody.
Okay, thank you.
JP?
Well, I was going to ask a question because I've seen a few investments in the last 2 weeks into small companies, and you've got some angel investors there and venture capital dudes there. And the shareholders agreements they're all having to sign are getting more kind of tougher on the founders. So the one I saw this week said, yes, we're putting in 100 grand or whatever the amount of money was, and you founders will warrant that you will do nothing to wreck SEIS or EIS. And then in another paragraph, it said, you will make whatever application on time and you will stand over it. And normally I see people say that we'll try our best not to wreck it, but we don't know what we're doing. But it's getting tougher. It's as if it's such a core part of the investment now that perhaps the investor wouldn't have invested if it wasn't available. So I'm seeing really onerous terms on founders. So my question is for the group, and maybe for yourself, Bruna, is what do you see young, well, not even young, but just early stage founders do that does wreck it? Have you ever seen that, whereby people sign up to a deal in a company and then they go and do something unwittingly that wrecks the potential for the tax benefits? And is there any tips you would give for startup founders out there as to what they should do to keep themselves happy with their investors who've asked them to not make a mess of that?
Well, from a founder's aspect, I would kind of just recommend, like learn the basics about the scheme, like ultimately, if you're going through advanced assurance, essentially, one of the first things I do is go through a founder, the qualifying criteria to see whether or not, they meet it and if there's anything that would potentially be an issue. So at that point, it's kind of like you kind of get an awareness of what areas would potentially be a problem, and it would tend to be only if there was something quite significant to the company that caused a change that would impact its SEIS. I often give the example of saying that in your advanced assurance, you say that you're a tech company, but whenever you, like a few years later, you're selling cars, like it's an outrageous example, but it is one of those significant kind of changes. So as long as the company, doesn't do anything drastic or, follows the path that's more or less set out in their business plan, they should more or less be okay. But regarding the timeline of actually having to complete a compliance statement and stuff, that in reality, that can be a bit awkward sometimes, because I'm sure, as you've noticed, nobody got anything done the past year, or especially on time at least. From a investor side, again, it is just one of those worth noting, make sure you know what the company intends to do. It's one of those things I kind of just suggest, have a call with a founder and just kind of get their point A to point B and just see what is the plan over the next while. And if there's anything that could be an alarm, raise it up and ask the questions.
Thank you so much, Bruna. I mean, I think it's a subject you only sometimes think about it when you're going through it. So if anybody wants to ask further questions with Bruna, or even Jonathan who's on the call, please do get in touch with ourselves or direct to Bruna. Bruna, do you want to drop your email address there into the chat? That would be great, and they're happy to take questions, and thank you very much. We've also, just for this evening, just for the guys on the call, got a couple of our own raise companies. And I was just going to bring them into the conversation, because as I mentioned at the start, our job essentially is to be, as part of our RAISE program, is to bring the startups along, help them with their tech product, help them go to market, and help them with their investor readiness and go to get investment. And essentially, we've been working both sides of the table in terms of developing the startups, but also developing our angel network. And we think, the next step for RAISE essentially is putting together a syndicate whereby angels can get started with angel investing through group investing. And the whole idea behind this is to try and entice more people into this asset class. It is high risk. It can be high reward, but you can also lose all your money. I have to say that. And also I have to say, Michael, that we're not a fund. We're not FCA regulated.
No, we offer absolutely no financial advice, guidance, or recommend. All we can do is signpost in the right direction. Thank you very much, FCA. We are soft launching. Hopefully you'll see in the press and on the social media channels over the next couple of days a RAISE syndicate, and that essentially is unleashing the power of group investing, bringing angels in that are interested in early stage investing and presenting them with deals that have completed the RAISE program. And the whole idea is that we have invested our time and energy in these companies. They've come a long way and they're ready to talk to investors. So hopefully they get a bit of a rubber stamp from RAISE, and then the angel investors can come along as a group and do the deals fairly quickly, but also at low risk, because you're coming in as a group, and also at reasonable valuations, and have good knowledge and connections around the table. So not just one investor, maybe a group that then can help share the knowledge and connections, but also the due diligence and
even the likes of the legal fees, for example. So that's what we're working towards, and I'll share some information on that shortly, but I just wanted to bring in our startups to give you their kind of feel for where they've come from, and a couple of quick introductions. So we have Kufa and Cindy and Charlene with us this evening. They've all completed the RAISE programme, and I just really wanted them to tell their story, quickly, a minute or two on each of their companies, to give you a feel of the types of companies that we have, and these are the types of companies that are essentially investor ready and looking at the moment. So yeah, who would like to go first? Kufa, you have your thumbs up, you can go first.
Oh gosh, Michael, I love your disclaimer. That was great. I saw JP smiling at that. He was very happy with that.
Yeah, I should have added as well. I'm investor aware. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I thought there was something else there. Thank you very much, Jenny, for inviting me on board. So in essence, MyPAM so stands for My People's Analytics Measured, and we basically enable organizations to make smarter sourcing and hiring decisions through using data science. So if you look at recruitment overall, the lack of alignment between what companies want to do and the realities of how they make that happen from a recruitment perspective. Attracting and recruiting people, it was very expensive, and it's something that organizations know and are aware of the expense, but it's actually understanding where does that expense come into play and how does that impact on us. So we basically have an analytics platform. The organizations, we take all their data and we put it into these key metrics from how long it takes them to hire, how much they cost to hire those individuals, how long it takes them to get the ROI within those individuals. And then we work with companies to kind of improve and manage those, because the aim is obviously how can we help them reduce their costs, how can we help them spend less time on ineffective methods and more time on actually developing their organization. So that's us. We're advanced assured SEIS and EIS, and we've got the full court at the moment. As I said, we've done our MVP. We've got a team of 5, and we're looking to grow. So yes, that's us. Based in Birmingham and cover the UK, soon to be international global superstars.
No, brilliant. I think it's really good to get a flavour of the types of companies. It's rather than me talking about them. So thank you. And if you want to drop your contact details into this chat as well. Cindy?
Yeah, sure. I'll go next. So thank you for the opportunity, Jenny, to present us here tonight. And everybody, I'm Cindy, founder and CEO of Amazi. Before I tell you what Amazi does, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the history of where Amazi actually comes from. And it actually came from working in the finance industry. So for my sins, I actually implemented regulations within the finance industry. So I was kind of that plug and play function that went from one institution to another. And what I found was with every institution that I worked with, it actually involved communicating with clients to help those financial institutions get compliant with the latest and greatest regulation. The issue with that was because I worked with so many financial institutions, I kind of came across the same clients with various financial institutions. And that meant what happens in the background is the same clients are being asked the same questions by multiple of institutions at the same time. And that goes for the same of due diligence and KYC processes. The problem really resonated with me when one client in particular responded by sending us a photo of the communications we just sent him covering his desk. And I was really taken aback by the lack of client consideration in that process. And that's sort of where the Amazi journey comes from. So in very simple steps, Amazi facilitates the creation of corporate cross-industry due diligence identities to effectively allow corporates to seamlessly prove who they are in their legitimacy. It's a very new revolutionary step for corporations on how they can do business. It also enables the cross-industry sharing of credentials that they've established through a very simplistic onboarding process with a regulated institution, which means that identity is regulated, is a regulated, validated identity. We utilize distributed ledger technology to ensure that the data isn't tampered with, and also that the input of the data is through a certification validated process. So in short, as I mentioned, is we remove the repetition of generating the information that is requested by the institutions for an organization by allowing the corporates to create this digital identity and effectively then share their credentials rather than being asked to produce the information over and over again. In short, that's what Amazi does. I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll also leave you my contact details.
No, thanks, Cindy. Again, you know, a different sector. We've got recruitment and we've got legal stroke corporate due diligence, and I think they're both growing sectors. So thank you. Pop your details into the chat and I'll come back and ask you guys a couple of questions in a minute. So move on to Charlene. Charlene's in health and safety and compliance as well, which has also been quite a hot topic given COVID. I think how many times has it changed?
Yeah, I think I checked the last check for the Northern Ireland version alone was in its 40s in terms of how often it updated. But yeah, that's the fun. So in keeping with compliance, my name's Charlene Armour. I am the founder of Armour. So Armour is an online platform that allows businesses to identify, manage and keep up to date with health, safety, environmental legislation and ISO management system standards. So this came about, I've worked as a legal consultant, an expert witness and an auditor for well over a decade and covering pretty much most industries. And the problem that kept arising was that businesses struggled with these document heavy processes. Legislation kept changing. They operated in different jurisdictions. And in turn, they were paying high rates for external consultants, i.e. people like me. And with the best will in the world, we all try to add value, but it wasn't the case. And what was happening was companies were paying, you know, anything from 5,000 a year to in excess of 100,000 a year for external consultants. Kind of in this sort of the SME sector, it gets infinitely higher for companies bigger than that. So our goal, with that in mind, our goal is to ultimately disrupt this industry by eliminating the need for external consultants, i.e. people like me, by streamlining the admin and the documentation process, giving them the tools that they need to simply self-certify themselves in a fraction of the time, ultimately protecting them from prosecution, fines and claims. So we had a fun time. We launched our version 1 slap bang in the middle of the first wave in June 2020. So we covered Northern Ireland jurisdiction purely to kind of test the market to see where we were. And we're now happy to say that we're going to launch our second version, which will cover worldwide jurisdiction at the end of June 2021. 2021, just checking the year. So at the moment, we're currently looking to raise 250,000 to close an existing pre-seed round with the view to bring on additional hires, particularly in development and content experts, and then hone into our digital sales and marketing strategy. So that's us. We are SEIS and EIS assurance certified. And if you want to ask any more questions, I'll stick my details into the chat box.
Brilliant. I think it was great again to have 3 companies, all different sectors, all showcasing that they've made real progress. So what we look for from our program is good teams with industry, you know, founders that know their founders inside out. Both Cindy, Kufa and Charlene know their industries. They've seen problems that they want to solve and they've created tech solutions and gone out to market with these. And then we've come back from an angel perspective and said, well, what more can we do to attract angels? And that's the SEIS and EIS, and they've all got that assurance, which is great. So they're all raising at the moment. And I guess, you know, from our side in terms of the syndicate, these are the types of deals we'll be bringing to the syndicate on a deal by deal basis. And we'll be looking to collate the round and bring on the angels investors as and when. As I mentioned earlier, we're not a fund, so it's the model of the angels essentially holding on to the money and having it available to invest as and when we would bring the deals. I guess the couple of questions I had, is in terms of that go-to-market piece and the investor-ready piece. You know, from, I mentioned earlier, the raised rubber stamp, and without putting too much spotlight on you guys and flattering us too much, you know, I think what makes us different from the raise program is, hopefully, in the raise syndicate, is that rubber stamp and the fact that you've progressed from where you were maybe to where your business is now. So a couple of thoughts maybe on how you think the program maybe has progressed you and got you investor ready for the likes of anybody thinking about a syndicate would be great. Kufa, what do you think?
Yeah, so for me, absolutely. I think it's when I joined Raise, it was sort of, you know, something very, very new. But I think when you look at the journey that we've taken, so the one-to-ones that we have, how we've managed to look at our products and kind of try and understand, okay, where we're taking this, we're looking at our value proposition, looking at how we position the business overall in terms of the marketplace, having access to a wide range of services. So, I mean, JP helped us in terms of, you know, when I registered the company, got a few things wrong, but he was there to sort of help pull that all together. So I think for me, you know, I did a pitch this afternoon, and, you know, when I look at when I started to where I am now, you know, the input of what Raise has done and having fellow founders on the journey with us and the WhatsApp group and seeing what everyone else is up to, having this resource that you can call into and sort of say, well, listen, how can we scale this? How can we grow this? I think if I was sat in the chair of an investor, you know, to be, you know, part of something that was connected to Raise sort of makes sense, because when you find a business, you know, you're running at 100 miles an hour, you know, you're juggling so many different things, and having that support network around you is something that, you know, you can't really put a value on, other than it's just amazing to have. So yeah, you know, from my perspective, it was really helped me a lot with the journey, understanding where we're going, what we need to do, you know, how to, you know, commercial sprint, you know, how we're going to bring our first customers on board, what to look at when we're doing our product development. So yeah, it's been a very interesting and learning process, and enjoyed being a sponge.
And then thinking about, Cindy, the kind of the syndicate model, do you think that would help your business in terms of being able to access some money from a group of angels rather than from going individually in those conversations? Do you think that would help your company?
Yeah, for sure. I think from our perspective is, you know, Rise Ventures has not been the only accelerator that we were part of. I think I should provide that context as well, because it will provide some background as to where my answer actually comes from. So the context is, we're less than a year old and we've graduated from 4 accelerators. That's the benefit of COVID. So COVID's actually been very good to us from a startup perspective. At the same time, I think the value that we've received from Rise Ventures in terms of getting ourselves investment ready is not comparable with some of the other accelerators that we've had, because we've got weekly conversations that we've still got with Rise Ventures. And it was through those weekly conversations that we've come to the idea that from a Marty perspective, the first round of funding that we would need definitely looks more like an angel round rather than a VC round. Because a VC round is, you know, they come with different different expectations, which is for us as an early stage startup doesn't necessarily make sense because we just don't have enough people on the ground yet. We kind of need that vote of confidence from a syndicate to be able to then move into the next bigger space where we can actually really truly grow, because our problem is so big that everybody that we speak to says, yes, this is a problem that the industry needs solving, but we need to start somewhere. And for us, an angel investment round is definitely a better place to start, because it's people that has either been through the problem, understands the problem, and has lived the problem. So a lot of the angel conversations that we're actually progressing is because people have lived and breathed the problem and effectively really understand the pain. And they're not held back by, say, the corporate structure that a VC process is holding themselves back from.
It's useful to compare the two, absolutely. And you know, we see the funds coming and trying to build relationships early on, but they definitely maybe wait a while to invest, but they like to know the founders early on. And thinking a wee bit more about SEIS and EIS, Charlene, I know you've talked a lot of investors about this. Do you think it's a good tool that angels try, you know, see the benefit from? Do you think it's helped your company get the SEIS and EIS?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. I would, having had conversations with, I suppose, multiple investors, it's probably the first question they ask. And in terms of, you know, working with you guys and Raise and any sort of conversations I've had sort of before going for SEIS and EIS, it was pretty much the first thing that most people said. And I understand why. It makes perfect sense, because at the end of the day, you know, the startup world and the investment world is risky business, and it mitigates that risk, especially for, you know, companies that are so new and, you know, are trying to flesh it out. So yeah, absolutely. And from a founder side, I find the process incredibly easy. I mean, I've used a small amount of the SEIS, but the process itself was very easy this end. So yeah, it's highly valuable.
Yeah, and I would echo that from the other side, seeing angel investors go through kind of the process of chasing the company maybe for a certificate and then going to the tax, you know, accountant at the end of the year and coming out the other side. I've seen it from the other side, and it's fairly straightforward. So the process that Brona talked about sounded very detailed if you haven't heard about it before. But as I mentioned maybe earlier, was actually it's not until you go through it that you realise it's fairly straightforward. And Brona, I think, kind of round it all up, it's just essentially about being prepared.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everybody, for your time this evening. Hopefully that gives you a bit of insights into the tax benefits of angel investing and makes it even more interesting, as well as supporting some of these great companies that we have on the call and being part of the employers of the future, as I like to say. Obviously, we mentioned the SEIS and the EIS support from Sapphire Capital. So if you have any questions, Brona's details are there in the chat. And also I mentioned our syndicate, so there's details on our website, and I'm happy to follow up after the call and have some conversations. And with 3 great companies here that are investor ready. So looking forward to seeing some news, some PR stories hitting the local and national press so in the next couple of months. And thanks very much, guys, for your time. Do you have any questions before we finish up? Happy enough? Brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. We'll finish up and let you enjoy the rest of your lovely evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you. Bye.